Hey, my name is Noah Carr. I'm 32 years old. I live in a second-floor apartment on the east side of Columbus, Ohio, about a mile from the maintenance facility where I've worked for the past 8 years. The apartment has one bedroom, a kitchen with a window that faces the parking lot, and a living room I've furnished mostly with things that were useful rather than things I particularly wanted. There's a couch, a coffee table, a lamp I bought at a hardware store because it was the right height and I didn't feel like going anywhere else. I work on planes. Not the flying part, the staying in the air part. I'm a licensed airframe and power plant mechanic for a regional carrier that runs routes up and down the eastern seaboard. What that means, in practice, is that I show up at the facility before the sun does, badge through 2 security checkpoints, and spend my day inside hangars that are never quite warm enough, running diagnostics and detailed inspections on aircraft that carry people to places I've mostly never been. I check hydraulic lines and control surface actuators and landing gear assemblies. I sign off on maintenance logs and work orders. I know when I'm done that I did the job right, because if I didn't, I know exactly what the consequences are, and that knowledge lives permanently somewhere at the back of everything I do. My routine is not complicated. I'm up by 5. I make coffee with the same machine I've had since I was 26. I drive to the facility in the dark, badge in, work until the day is done. I come home and eat whatever takes the least preparation, usually something from the deli counter at the grocery store 2 blocks over, eaten standing at the kitchen counter. I watch restoration videos on my laptop. Old motorcycles, old furniture, old houses getting their floors sanded back down to something worth keeping. I find that kind of thing easier to watch than most other things. Somebody takes something that has been neglected and they work on it carefully, and by the end of it, it's right again. That part never gets old to me. By 9:30, sometimes 10, I'm asleep. That's most of it. My phone doesn't get many calls after 7. That's not a complaint. It's just accurate. I had been with a woman named Claire for almost 2 years, and it ended the way things end when one person finally gets honest. She told me I was too steady. She said she could always predict exactly what I was going to do, and she said it like that was a problem with me rather than a feature. I understood what she meant. I didn't argue. I didn't try to explain that steady was the only way I knew how to be. I helped her move the last of her things into her car on a Sunday afternoon in November, and then I went back inside, and I didn't think about it as much as I probably should have. That was 2 years ago. I had gotten used to the quiet. I would not have been on that flight at all if the facility's training coordinator hadn't flagged in September that my composite repair certification was expiring in December. The recertification course was only offered twice a year, and the nearest open session was in Seattle at a maintenance facility up in the industrial district near Georgetown. 5 days of coursework, 7 if you counted the travel days. I had never flown as a passenger on a commercial aircraft. In 12 years working aircraft maintenance, I had always been on the other side of the jetway. The side where you know everything that is happening and understand every sound and vibration and have absolutely no need to tell yourself that the strange noise during climb is normal. That Friday morning, I checked in at the counter at Port Columbus with a duffel bag and a 200-page recertification manual I had been meaning to start since August. The gate agent gave me a window seat in row 14. I boarded early, found the seat, stowed the bag, and spent about 15 minutes watching the rest of the plane fill in. The seat beside me was empty when they made the final boarding call. Then she appeared at the top of the jetway, moving fast, one hand on the shoulder strap of a canvas bag that kept sliding off her shoulder, the other hand holding a boarding pass she'd clearly been gripping for a while. The paper had gone soft at the folds from being handled too many times. Her dark hair had started the day pulled back, I could tell, but it had come mostly free and was escaping at her temples and behind her ears. She was wearing a gray cardigan over a white shirt, thin fabric, something more suited to late September than the first week of October. She found row 14, checked the number on the seat, and sat down beside me. Set the bag on her lap. Closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Not the kind of eyes closing that means relief. The other kind. The kind you do when you are trying to hold together for the next few minutes until the situation makes that easier. I had my headphones in my bag. I had the recertification manual on my lap, open to a chapter on bonded honeycomb structure repair that I had been putting off for 2 months. I had a window seat and most of a row to myself, and no reason in the world not to put the headphones in and let the next 4.5 hours pass in comfortable silence. The plane pushed back from the gate. We taxied toward the runway. And when the engines wound up for the takeoff roll and the aircraft began to accelerate, her right hand moved sideways on the shared armrest between our seats and closed around it. Not aggressively, just firmly, like it was something she needed to be there, and she needed to know it would hold. I left the headphones in the bag. We lifted off over the flat October landscape, the pale fields and the highway interchange and the gray-roofed sprawl of the east side, and leveled out somewhere over Indiana, and the seatbelt sign went off. And she released the armrest and sat back and looked out the window past me at the blanket of cloud below us. "Sorry," she said a few minutes later, "about the armrest." "It's a shared armrest," I said. She looked at me. A small, dry smile, the kind that has nothing to do with being happy. "Most people fight over it. I don't need it." She nodded, and that seemed to settle something, and she reached into her bag and pulled out a novel and opened it to a page near the middle, and I opened the recertification manual. We read in silence for a while, or I tried to. I noticed, without intending to, that she turned a page and then turned it back, then forward again, reading the same page 2, 3 times. She wasn't absorbing it. She was just moving her eyes somewhere safe. I said, without looking up, "The chapter I'm on is about repairing cracks in aircraft composite panels. It may be the least interesting thing written in the English language." She lowered the book slightly. "That's a specific claim. I've had 2 months to think about it." She looked at the manual cover, then at me. "You work on planes?" "I maintain them. I'm going to Seattle for a recertification course." "So you make sure they stay in the air?" "Mostly I make sure they can get off the ground properly in the first place." She seemed to think about that. "What's the thing you check most carefully? What worries you most?" I had been asked about my work by dozens of people over the years, and the question was almost always one of 3, whether I liked to fly, whether knowing what could go wrong made me nervous, and whether I had ever found something really alarming. No one had ever asked what I checked most carefully. I told her. Control surface actuators. The mechanisms that translate a pilot's input into actual movement of the aircraft. A pilot can push a rudder pedal all the way to the floor, but if the actuator isn't responding precisely to spec, nothing happens the way it's supposed to. The connection between what you intend and what the aircraft does breaks down, and by the time you notice, you are already in a situation. "That makes sense," she said. She said it the way someone says it when it actually does. "Most people find it boring. Most people don't want to know how things actually work," she said. "They want to believe it's magic. Knowing the mechanism ruins it for them." "Does it ruin it for you?" She thought about it honestly. "No, I think the mechanism is the interesting part." Her name was Mara Collins. She was 30 years old. She taught 7th grade science at a school in Columbus, had been there for 4 years, and was flying to Seattle to stay with her sister for a while and figure out what she wanted to do next. She said it in the particular way of someone who has rehearsed the sentence enough that it sounds like the answer to a different question. I didn't push on it. We talked about her students instead. She told me about a project she'd assigned the previous spring, build something that demonstrates a physics principle, and one boy had constructed a working hydraulic system out of syringes and plastic tubing. He'd filled both syringes with colored water and connected them, and pressed one plunger and watched the other move. And then he'd understood, viscerally, why a brake pedal does what it does. She'd given him a perfect score. He'd looked at her like no one had done that before. Kids like him, she said. They just need someone to take the thing they're already thinking about and tell them that it counts. I told her about a mechanic I'd trained under early in my career, an older man named Ray Outen, who told me the only difference between a good mechanic and a poor one was whether you could tell the difference between a sound that mattered and a sound that didn't. Every machine makes noise. Most of it is irrelevant. A small amount of it is everything. The job is learning which is which, and the only way to learn it is to pay attention long enough that your hands know before your brain does. Is that true of other things too? She asked. Probably, I said. Somewhere over South Dakota, a man in the row ahead of us slumped forward. His wife touched his shoulder, and he didn't straighten up. She looked around her with the helpless expression of someone who doesn't know what protocol applies. Mara was already unbuckled. She moved forward into the aisle and crouched beside the man and spoke to him in a voice that was quiet and entirely without panic. She asked him his name. She asked where he felt it. Head, chest, stomach. She asked his wife when he'd last eaten and whether he'd had anything to drink. A flight attendant appeared and Mara identified herself. First aid certified, she said. And she'd seen this in kids and in adults, and she was pretty sure she knew what this was. She stayed there for about 12 minutes. She gave him water. She talked to him in the same unhurried explanatory tone I imagined she used in a classroom when something complicated needed to become simple. By the time she came back to row 14, the man's color had returned, and his wife was holding his hand and not looking frightened anymore. Mara sat down. She picked up her novel. Anxiety episode, she said. The altitude makes them worse for some people. He'll be okay. She said it the way Ray had said things about engines. Factual, not performing calm, just calm. She had not needed anyone to tell her what to do or to witness her doing it correctly. She had just seen what was needed and done it and come back. I looked back at the composite repair manual. It seemed less urgent than it had 40 minutes ago. Over Montana, the cloud cover had broken, and the Rockies were below us, pale and enormous and indifferent. Most of the cabin was quiet. The light had shifted to something flatter and more honest. She had put the novel away. She was looking out the window past me at the mountains. I was with someone for 4 years, she said. She didn't look at me. He wasn't a bad person. He was just. I kept adjusting myself to fit around him, getting smaller, because I thought that's what you do when you love someone who needs more space. And one day I looked at myself and I didn't know how to be full-sized anymore. A pause. I've been practicing the last few months, being full-sized again. I'm not good at it yet. You were pretty good at it 12 minutes ago, I said. She looked at me, and it was brief, but it was the first time she looked at me like I was a person rather than a stranger with the right seat assignment. I told her about Claire. Not the whole thing, just the accurate part. She said I was too steady. I think what she meant was that I wasn't surprising enough. I've thought about it for 2 years, and I think she was right about both things. I also think I stopped. What? I also think I didn't know how to be anything other than what I was. So I let her go and I went back to work, and I kept being the same way. Because steady was all I had. Mara was quiet for a moment. "That's the saddest thing you've said," she said. "It wasn't meant as a complaint." "I know," she said. "That's the sad part." I didn't have an answer to that. I looked out the window at the mountains, and she looked at them too, and neither of us said anything for a while, and that was fine. The kind of fine that happens when two people have said enough that silence doesn't feel like absence. There is a thing I understand from 12 years working on aircraft. A component that has been running under stress for too long doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't make dramatic sounds or throw warning lights. It just runs, correctly, or close enough to correctly, and carries its load. And the only evidence is in the tolerance readings that are a fraction outside of specification, in the wear patterns that are a millimeter off from what they should be. The component isn't failing, it's compensating. It's doing more work than it was ever designed to do, because somewhere in the system, something else stopped pulling its share. I don't know exactly when I understood that about Mara Collins, but somewhere over the mountains of Montana, I understood it clearly. Without either of us marking the moment, her arm had settled against mine on the shared armrest. She didn't move. I didn't move. Outside the window, the Rockies went on for a very long time. We started our descent into Seattle about 40 minutes before landing. The Puget Sound came into view through the window, gray-green and flat and enormous, with the city rising above it and the mountains behind. She reached over and turned her phone off airplane mode. The change in her face was immediate and specific. She read something on the screen, a message, from the way her eyes moved across it, and everything that had been loosening in her since Montana went still again. She set the phone face down on her knee, then picked it up, then set it down again. "Someone you're trying to leave behind?" I asked. "He says he's in Seattle. Work trip. He wants to meet and talk." She looked at the seat back ahead of her. "He has a way of finding where I am. Is talking to him what you want?" She was quiet for a moment. "He has a way of making what I want seem like a failing. Like wanting space is selfish. Wanting to leave is selfish. Wanting to be okay is selfish. He doesn't say it that way. He's very reasonable about it." "The reasonable version is the one that's hardest to argue with," I said. She looked at me. "Not everyone who does that knows they're doing it," I said. "But some of them do." She nodded once, very slightly, and looked back at the window. The plane descended. Seattle grew larger and more particular below us. Neighborhoods, water, the green that was everywhere in a way Columbus never was. The seatbelt sign came on. People around us were stowing things, straightening up, becoming ready to land. She sat still. Then she looked at me. "Promise you'll still remember me when we land," she said. Quietly, not dramatically, like something she had been carrying in her pocket for a while and had finally decided to take out and put on the table between us. I looked at her. I understood what she was actually asking. She was asking whether she was the kind of person who gets remembered, whether a stranger on a plane would walk off the jetway and think about her for 30 seconds and then not at all. The way water forgets the shape of your hand. She had spent 4 years being made smaller, and before that, who knew how long, and she had arrived at a place where she expected to disappear the moment the context that contained her ended. She was asking whether she was worth the trouble of being carried forward. I thought about it. I did not say yes immediately. She would not have believed yes immediately. "That's not something I'm going to have trouble with," I said. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she nodded and turned back to the window, and the wheels came down with the usual heavy mechanical certainty, and we landed at SeaTac in the thin afternoon light. We stood at the baggage carousel in the terminal, and I wrote my number into her phone, and she wrote hers in mine. It was not dramatic. It was the same as any exchange of necessary information. She had a sister picking her up. I had a shuttle to the hotel in Georgetown. Before she went, she looked at me once more with those steady, dark eyes. I meant what I said, I told her, on the plane. She nodded. I know you did. A pause. That's why I asked. Her bag came off the carousel and she lifted it and walked toward the exit doors. I watched her go until she was through them. Then my own bag appeared and I picked it up. That night, from my hotel room, I texted her 2 words. Landed, remembered. She took about 20 minutes to respond. Then, good. Then, several minutes after that, a photograph of the harbor from wherever her sister lived. The water the color of late afternoon. The mountains behind it. No caption, just the image. The training ran 8 to 5, Tuesday through Friday, with a half-day Saturday. Composite repair certification, which is exactly as interesting as it sounds, but which I was finding harder than usual to concentrate on. Wednesday evening, I texted Mara and asked if she wanted to get food somewhere if she had time. She said yes, and named a place near Pike Place Market. She was there when I arrived. She had looked up the menu online and already ordered for herself and flagged a table by the window. She had her hair down. She was wearing a dark blue shirt, the good kind of blue, and she looked different than she had on the plane, not more relaxed exactly, but more herself. Like the altitude and the airport and the fluorescent terminal light had been a container she'd been fitted into, and she had stepped out of it. We talked for 3 hours. She told me about her sister Sarah, who was 11 years older, who had lived in Seattle for 15 years, who worked in hospital administration and was, Mara said, the most direct person she knew in any room. She said to me last year, Mara said, "You're not in love with him. You're just afraid of what comes after." She said it the same way she'd tell you a restaurant was closed on Mondays. Just a fact. Was she right? Of course she was right. I just needed 8 more months to catch up to it. Thursday, she texted me a photograph of a harbor seal at the aquarium with the caption, "This is you, actually." I looked at the photograph for a while. The seal had an expression of complete, resigned competence. I texted back, "That's not inaccurate." She sent back a laughing emoji. Then, "Don't take it personally. He looks reliable." I looked at that word for a moment. Then I put the phone down and went back to the recertification manual. Friday evening, I was at the hotel when my phone rang. It was Mara. "He's here." Her voice was careful, quiet in the specific way of a room where someone else is present and can hear. At Sarah's building. I put the manual down. "How long?" 20 minutes. He brought flowers. A pause. "He's very good at this part. Do you want me to come?" She was quiet for a moment. Long enough that I understood what the silence meant, that she was deciding whether she had the right to ask, which was its own kind of answer. "Yes," she said. The building was 12 minutes away. I found parking and walked into the lobby, and he was still there. Daniel Marsh, as I would learn later, late 30s, dark jacket, the kind of put together that doesn't look assembled, it just looks like the natural state of things. He had the flowers still in his hand, and a look on his face that was simultaneously wounded and entirely in control of the room. He looked at me when I walked in. "Friend?" he said to Mara, placing me. "Yes," she said. Mara was standing near the elevator bank. She was not shaking. She was not crying. She had her arms crossed in front of her chest, not defensively, more like she was holding herself in the shape she needed to be in for the next few minutes. Daniel spoke in a measured, reasonable voice. He spoke about 4 years and about having been good to each other, and about not making permanent decisions from an airport, from distance, from whatever this was. He used the word understand several times. Each time he used it, it didn't contain any understanding. It contained the performance of understanding, which is a different thing, and which I have learned to notice the way you learn to notice the difference between a sound that matters and a sound that doesn't. I moved to stand beside Mara. Not in front of her, beside her. Daniel looked at her. He said something about just a few months and a real conversation, and after everything. He said all of it without raising his voice. His voice had probably worked for 4 years the same way it was working now. Mara looked at him for a long moment. Her face was very still. "You didn't understand me," she said. Her voice was level and plain. "You understood what you needed from me. Those are different things. I spent 4 years trying to explain the difference, and you kept hearing the same thing, and I can't explain it anymore." She paused. "I'm asking you to leave." He started to speak. "I'm asking you to leave," she said again. Exactly the same. Not louder. Not harder. Just the same sentence stated a second time because it was still true and he had apparently needed to hear it again. He looked at me. Something passed through his expression. The calculation of whether this situation was worth continuing, and then he set the flowers down on the lobby table and left. The door closed behind him. The lobby went quiet. Mara stood still for a moment. Then she uncrossed her arms and let out one long, slow breath. She walked over to the table, picked up the flowers, walked to the waste bin near the elevator, and placed them in it. Then she turned around. "Thank you," she said, "for coming." "You did that," I said. "I just stood there." "I know," she said. "But I needed someone to stand there." Sarah came down in the elevator about 10 minutes later. She was tall, with the same steady dark eyes as her sister, and she looked at me the way someone looks when they are forming an accurate opinion quickly and don't bother to hide that they're doing it. "You're Noah," she said. It was not a question. "Yes, Mara talks to you like you're worth talking to," she said. "That's not as common as it should be." She looked at her sister. "Come upstairs, I'll make dinner." We sat around Sarah's kitchen table until nearly 11. She made pasta from scratch. She had been cooking since she was 12 and saw no reason to stop. And she told us about a colleague at the hospital who had been creating problems for a year and had finally resigned. And about a neighbor's dog she had been secretly feeding for 3 weeks, and at one point, without any particular lead-up, she looked directly at me and said, "Mara hasn't introduced anyone to me in 4 years." "Sarah," Mara said. "I'm just noting it," Sarah said. She refilled my glass. I walked back to my car at 11:15. The air was cold and clear, and the mountains at the edge of the city were dark shapes against a slightly lighter sky. I sat in the car for a while before starting it. That night I texted Mara, "You okay?" She took a few minutes. Then, getting there. Then, "Thank you for tonight." Really then, after a longer pause, I keep thinking about what you said. On the plane. About reliable. I looked at her message for a while. Then I wrote back, "I've been thinking about that too." She didn't answer immediately. I drove back toward Georgetown and my phone buzzed at a stoplight. "I think what she said about you being too reliable was wrong," Mara wrote. "I think she confused reliable with safe. Those aren't the same thing." I pulled into the hotel parking lot and sat in the dark. Then, "How are they different?" A longer pause than the others. "Reliable means you show up. Safe means you don't cost anyone anything. She wanted someone who didn't cost anything. That's not the same as someone who shows up. I sat with that for a while. Then I wrote, "Did I cost anything this week?" The pause was the longest yet. "Yes," she wrote, but in a way that felt like gain. Saturday afternoon, after the half-day of training, I drove back across the city and Mara met me outside Sarah's building, and we walked to a park near the water. We got coffee from a place we passed and sat on a bench and watched the ferries move across the Sound and the mountains hold still behind them for about 2 hours. She said, at one point, "I don't know what I'm doing." That's not a bad place to be. It feels like one. Only from the inside. I watched a ferry make its slow way toward the dock. A mechanic's first job on any unfamiliar aircraft isn't to start fixing things. It's to get into the right position to see what actually needs doing. You can't repair something standing where you've always stood. You have to move first. Get a different angle. Most people skip that part because it feels like nothing is happening yet. I looked at the water. You moved. You got on a plane. That was the hard part. She was quiet. Then Noah. "Yeah, I've been asking people to remember me for years." She said it to the mountains, not to me, in different ways. Asking people to notice that I was there, that I had done the thing, that I was worth the trouble. And they would, for a while. And then they wouldn't. And I'd convince myself that was just how things worked. That I was asking for too much. She paused. And then I sat down next to a man on a plane who fixes things for a living, and he didn't put his headphones in. I looked at her. "I noticed," I said, "for what it's worth. I noticed all of it. I noticed from the armrest." She looked down at the coffee cup in her hands. Her mouth did something that was in the direction of a smile without quite being one. Something more true than a smile. I had spent 12 years being careful. I checked everything twice. I did not make decisions until I had weighed every component. I had been maintaining aircraft, faithfully and correctly, so that other people could get off the ground and go somewhere, and I had done it for so long that I had stopped noticing I was always on the same side of the jetway. I had a thought that was clear and specific and didn't require any further analysis. I did not want to get on a plane tomorrow and go back to the apartment on the east side and the deli counter and the late-night restoration videos. I did not want to let this become a story I told myself about a week in October when something could have happened. "I've been looking into what it would take to transfer to a facility out here," I said. "There's a maintenance operation at the field in Renton. They're usually short on A&P mechanics." She looked at me. "That's a big thing." "I know." "Because of a week?" "Because of a week," I said. "And because I think I've been fixing things so that other people could get somewhere for a long time. I think maybe it's time to go somewhere myself." She was quiet for a long moment. The ferries moved. A group of children ran across the grass behind the bench, their voices carrying in the cold. "You'd be doing this before you know if there's anything here," she said finally. "That's not careful." "No," I said. "It isn't. That's not like you. Maybe, or maybe reliable and safe aren't the same thing." She turned to look at me. For a moment her face was very open, the careful steadiness gone, just her actual face underneath it. "You're really slow, Noah," she said quietly. "I know. I figured that out somewhere over Idaho." I reached over and took her hand. Not dramatically, just that. The mountains held their position across the water. The ferries moved in their slow, reliable arcs. Neither of us said anything for a while, and neither of us moved. "I meant it," she said. "About it feeling like gain." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm telling you this now." 6 months later, my name was on a lease in the Beacon Hill neighborhood of Seattle, in a second-floor apartment with a kitchen window that this time faced a courtyard with a maple tree. The tree had already been extraordinary in October, and I had been told by the neighbor downstairs that it would be extraordinary again. I was 4 weeks into a position at the maintenance facility in Renton, working on narrow-body aircraft for a carrier that had been short-handed for longer than they'd admitted in the job listing. The work was the same work: hydraulic lines, control surfaces, the documentation and the early mornings, and it was right. The way a component that's been running slightly out of tolerance feels right after a proper calibration. Like the numbers finally matching the spec. Mara had gone back to Columbus in November to close her apartment and find out whether her school would hold her position. They would not. She found a position at a K-8 school in Columbia City, starting in January. Her students were skeptical and quick, and exactly the kind of kids who needed someone to take the thing they were already thinking about and tell them it counted. One of them built a model airplane from a kit and asked if he could keep it in the classroom. She said yes and texted me a photograph of it on her desk. I had it pulled up on my phone for a week. I drove home from Renton in the evenings, and the apartment had light in it. That was the first thing I noticed every time. The light, before anything else. Not because she had added more lamps, just because someone was home. She made tea every evening before I got back. She liked chamomile. I had never particularly liked chamomile. She made 2 cups anyway, every night, without asking, and left mine on the counter. I drank it. I didn't tell her for 3 weeks that I didn't really like chamomile, and when I finally did, she looked at me with complete, unruffled calm and said, "I know." The level of calm she said it with suggested she had known for approximately 3 weeks, and had been waiting. In March, Sarah drove down and had dinner with us. Mara had been learning the pasta recipe for 2 months and made it from scratch. And it was right. Not perfect in the way a recipe can be when someone makes it on autopilot, but right in the way it is when someone has been practicing because it matters to them. Sarah sat at the kitchen table and ate, and looked around the apartment with the direct, accurate gaze she brought to everything. "This is good," she said. She meant the pasta. She also did not mean only the pasta. On a Tuesday evening in April, Mara was at the table with her lesson plans spread out around her, one finger marking her place in something, frowning at the problem of how to explain angular momentum to a 12-year-old who already understood it intuitively, but couldn't yet articulate it. I was on the couch behind her, with a maintenance bulletin I'd been meaning to read. The apartment was quiet in the specific way of 2 people comfortable enough in each other's presence that quiet doesn't mean anything is wrong. I had been trying for months to locate the exact mechanism. I worked with mechanisms. I understood systems and tolerances, and the way components fit together, and the consequence of a single element being slightly out of specification. I had tried to reverse engineer it, find the precise point at which the trajectory of my life had changed, identify the cause, document the sequence. I had not been able to do it. The mechanism was too ordinary. The sequence was too simple. She had asked me to remember her, and I had. And then I had done it again, and again, until remembering her was not a decision I made, but simply part of how I moved through the day. I know this about aircraft. A plane doesn't fly because its components are in perfect condition. A plane flies because everything that has been carefully maintained moves together, at the right moment, in the right direction, with the right weight behind it. The maintenance is not the goal. The maintenance is what you do so that when the moment comes, the machine is ready to go somewhere. I had been maintaining myself for a very long time. I had been careful and steady and correct, and I had signed off on 12 years of work orders, and I had not gone anywhere. She had sat down in the seat beside me. She had asked me not to forget her. She had asked it quietly, without drama, the way you ask for something you don't quite believe you're allowed to have. I had once believed the apartment on the east side, and the deli counter and the 9:30 bedtime, and the quiet phone were my life in its complete form. That was not an unreasonable thing to believe. It was accurate. It was just missing a boarding pass worn soft at the folds, and a woman who had been running herself below specification for too long, and the question she asked at 35,000 feet somewhere over Idaho. She didn't need anyone to remember her. She needed someone to show up. I had not understood until she asked me that those are the same thing.